Hi guys, this is Malobi, CEO of Pan-African Traders, and you are listening to the Pan-African Traders podcast. On this podcast, we are going to be having interviews and speaking with some experts that are involved with the B2B trade within Africa and the diaspora. Stay tuned for what's up next. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Malobi from the Pan-African Traders podcast, sponsored by Kadan. And today I'm speaking with Tseli. She's going to obviously correct the way I'm pronouncing her name if it's incorrect. But I met Tseli through Clubhouse, actually, in a room. I was talking with Goiti, who is also in the cannabis space in South Africa. And yeah, we've kept in touch, and she's doing some really interesting things. So I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation. And the cannabis conversation still is a little bit controversial in some circles. But I think that whether you are a smoker or not, whether you believe in it for medicinal reasons or more libertarian reasons, I think it's an interesting conversation nonetheless to have, and I'm really happy to have a guest like Tseli to talk about this subject. So, welcome, Tseli. First of all, how are you doing today? How's wherever you are? Where are you, by the way?
Thanks, Malobi. And yes, you're saying my name correctly. The L-I in Lesotho is pronounced as a D. So thank you, I appreciate that. I'm in Lesotho. I was traveling a bit over the last few weeks, but I came back home on Monday. So I'm settling in again and just basically picking up work from where I left off.
Awesome. And tell us a little bit about Lesotho. You don't have to go into too much details, but some people might not even know what Lesotho is or where it is. So can you talk about maybe what it is and how it's different from South Africa?
Sure, no problem. So Lesotho is a country, it's an enclave. It is completely surrounded by South Africa. It's an independent country altogether, and it has the royal family and a prime minister. And it is notably one of, or if not the leading country in Africa, and in terms of developments in the cannabis industry. So it's a small country with a population of about 2 million people, and it's been going through a lot of interesting times lately, politically, but as well as in terms of economic development, and the cannabis industry is one such example. So that is where I'm from. I'm from the capital city called Maseru, and it's home, though I did spend some time living and studying in South Africa and in Germany. But then as the cannabis industry really took off in Lesotho, I decided to move back home, as that was the only African country where you could gain experience in the commercial cannabis industry at the time. So I've really been learning and growing with the industry as it's been developing.
Wow, that's super interesting. So that actually leads on to my next question. I was going to ask, what is it exactly that you do? How are you currently participating in this cannabis industry?
Sure. So initially, when I got involved in the commercial legal industry, I was employed at a law firm, and clients approached this law firm, and I was handed a brief that went into assisting these prospective clients to secure a license that would enable them to get into the cannabis industry, specifically the medical cannabis industry. And my task then at that point was really the admin and the research and liaising with government regarding the license regime and the permits, and also looking to, the international best practices and what was happening at the UN level and what other jurisdictions were doing in terms of implementing a licensing program. So I did that through the law firm where I was employed. And over time, I think my interest in the industry really grew, and I found so much more to the cannabis industry. and began writing more articles and presenting some of my research that I had done independently at conferences and seminars. And from then on, I went on to establish my own consulting company that offers legal advice to operators in the cannabis industry, both in the private sector as well as the public sector. And so basically that's the main thing I do. And then in 2020, I was also asked to be a committee member on the African Union's expert committee on cannabis, which seeks to develop a common African position on cannabis.
Wow, this is really, really interesting. First of all, I mean, you said you were writing research papers. You said that, like...
Correct.
I was just independently writing my research papers. A lot of people wouldn't or haven't done things like this. So, you know, what was this research about? I know it's around cannabis, but is there anything specific?
Sure. I guess what I would find when I was, doing research in the workspace is I maybe started to identify gaps or areas that I was particularly interested in. So I looked into issues relating to the banking world and how they view the cannabis industry and what that means for transactions and international trade of cannabis and cannabis-based products. I also have an interest in regional integration and harmonization as well. So from that view, I also looked into, what the prospects would be if, say, African countries, or even if we take it, a notch down, if we looked at maybe regionally, what would it look like if countries in the SADC region or the EAC had similar laws relating to cannabis, and how that could possibly facilitate better use of resources and collaboration, and also just ease of movement, because the laws relating to drugs and cannabis specifically still differ so much. So really, I was really looking at where the gaps were and looking at as well as what my own personal interests were. And that's really what my research has been based around.
That's something that when you mentioned the banking stuff, it's something that I'm very aware of. Working in the CBD space, my mother she tapped into the CBD business a little bit, and there was a lot of red tape, a lot of bottlenecks there in terms of finding the right merchant account, finding an affordable one, especially as a startup in the space. So I guess from your research, what did you find when it came to financial institutions in the cannabis industry, and has that changed over time to today?
So what I have found has partially been through my own research, but also providing services to some of the local banks here in Lesotho. And what has been the key issue has been around, I believe it's the correspondent banking issue, where the local banks have dealings with these international larger banks who still have, I don't want to say issues, but legally they still have hang-ups regarding their involvement in cannabis-related transactions. Again, because it's still a bit gray in a lot of countries. And then obviously there's other issues relating to the use of the dollar in such transactions, because cannabis is still federally illegal. So there is still a lot of red tape and hesitancy. And obviously the fact that the industry has been illegal for so long, it's also a bit of a transition period to legitimizing the cannabis industry and normalizing deals and getting financing and so on, and to also make the banking world comfortable. As we know, the banking world is very conservative. So it's very interesting. However, I think it's slowly changing. So again, it also depends on the jurisdiction you're talking about. I believe in Canada, there's a bit more leeway because, across the country, cannabis is legal. In some European countries, you do get some banks that are perhaps more open to dealing with these kind of transactions, but majority of them are not. So it's a slow process, but I believe we're getting there, because a lot of the research has indicated that the industry is very lucrative, so it can't be ignored. However, it's a question of, convincing and liaising with the banking world, and hopefully that will lead to more progressive steps from that side as well.
Yeah, and I agree. The way things are moving, it's almost an unstoppable force. And the more other countries legalize it, the more it's going to be normalized. And, that's how things change eventually. So I do think that in the long run, we'll start seeing financial institutions being a bit more lenient, but, we'll play it by ear. You also mentioned that you've got a consulting company. Can you tell us a bit about, what that company does? What are the services? How do you help, whether it's individuals or corporate entities?
Sure. So the company is called Wane Solutions, and Wane is a play on the Sesotho word for cannabis, which is matekwane. And basically, Wane provides legal services relating to the cannabis industry to clients who are, typically my clients have been working in the private sector, but now and then I also do engage with government officials and policymakers as well, in terms of legislative reform relating to the cannabis industry, as well as in the private sector side. My work really, it's more around compliance, assisting clients in terms of their applications for licenses and permits, as well as assisting them throughout, their operations in terms of making sure that their documentation is always in line with the law, and that their procedures and governance are also as they should be.
That's interesting. So just a random question, as you're talking about, allowing or helping people with their permits and documentations. Have you found that there's been a massive influx of new business and investors coming into Lesotho due to its, more liberal stance on cannabis? Or have you seen maybe it's not really as much as you'd expect, given that, Lesotho is one of the few countries that's, so, liberal when it comes to cannabis?
I can definitely say that in the beginning, say 2017, 2018, there was a large influx of investors coming into the country. And I think that also speaks to where the industry was globally at the time. Canada and a lot of Canadian operators were doing very well, and they were expanding globally. And Lesotho also benefited from being the first and only African country at the time where commercial cannabis operations were legal, and it was possible to engage in such operations. So during that period, again, also was before COVID. So again, the economies of a lot of the countries that were already ahead in terms of their cannabis operations, they found an opportunity to invest in Lesotho, and then there were various partnerships between the international companies and the local players as well. So that was a very exciting time. However, I think there was a lot of havoc as well. You got a lot of people coming in and out. So there was also, I think, an element of instability. And so now we've sort of seen things sort of normalizing, where the natural process where a lot of the people that maybe did not have a long-term plan or strategy have sort of been stepping out of the industry. So some of the ones that are still pushing ahead are maybe ones that had a clearer vision and the proper strategy. And again, that gives us a lot of hope in terms of managing a sustainable industry. So all in all, yes, we've seen the green rush. We've seen the investors flowing into the country. Initially, I think they were mainly from Canada and Israel. However, at this stage, a lot of the local companies are looking to and are already in the process of exporting to the EU market as well as Israel. So these relationships also, I think, they're also a function of what transactions or what relationships are possible. For example, I do know we do engage a lot with a lot of American companies and operators as well. However, the federal legality still poses a challenge in a lot of ways. So I guess these relationships also go and flow with how the industry and the global landscape develops.
Yeah, well said. And, one thing whilst we were talking about that, it made me start thinking, we're talking about big Canadian corporations, American, Israeli, etc. But a lot of people have this concern that, a lot of Africans or indigenous people are not really able to take part in this industry. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that, it's mainly a funding issue, it's because there's a lot of the licenses in different countries are quite expensive. So is it mainly a financing issue that's stopping local players from getting into the industry?
I think definitely the finance is a key issue in terms of being able to meet the requirements that are then set by the government. So that is one of the critical ones. Secondly, I think the issue that a lot of African countries are facing is the fact that a lot of governments have not necessarily encouraged the development of a domestic cannabis industry, which therefore leaves operators in a position whereby they must then seek international markets to export to. And so then that obviously leads to the need to develop those relationships in order to ensure that you have a market to sell to. So I think it's finance. It's also the issue of the fact that there isn't a concerted effort to create domestic markets and to liberalize such domestic markets. So I think those two factors do definitely lead to more relationships with international partners. And unfortunately, yes, in some cases there is exploitation and there is lack of transparency regarding these relationships and what the arrangements really entail. Some have also been very successful, and again, because some of the international markets have been at this longer than a lot of African countries, we also do benefit sometimes from the know-how that they contribute to the project as well, because they have maybe been trading in cannabis related commodities for some time. So, and again, to be an international player and to be competitive at that level, you do need to engage with obviously people that may have more experience in that line. However, I do also feel strongly that African countries also need to take better ownership of what it is that we want to gain from the industry, because yes, it's one thing to be an international global player. However, I do think that there's a lot of value and a lot of indigenous knowledge that we have not fully tapped into that could also create more value for African countries.
No, I totally agree. And it's just this interesting situation where, now I'm just speaking purely from a subjective opinion. I feel like a lot of African countries are seeing this as a way to make money, which is fair enough. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? So it only makes sense to use it as an opportunity to, make some exports, generate some revenue for their countries. But when it comes to how they, socially view cannabis, they might not actually be very socially open to cannabis. So it's like, then they don't actually want to embrace it domestically. They don't want to legalize it domestically, but they'll legalize it for export. So it's an interesting situation where it's like they're making this line, this invisible line, and creating it to separate. Oh, okay, well, we're okay with growing it just for exports, but if it's for local consumption, we're not okay with it. Would you agree with that, or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
I think generally you are correct. That is definitely a big challenge. And again, I think a lot of the developments that we've been seeing across the continent are fueled by an economic need to liberalize the cannabis industry, rather than it happening sort of organically the way it has in places like California, where it's done in a piecemeal way, and it's really been more based around the issues relating to access to cannabis-based medicine and so on, and then it grows from there. So I think what we're seeing happening across Africa is a little bit different. It's more driven by economic push factors. Hence, many governments may then be looking to create a very narrow pathway to the cannabis industry, which again, it is very narrow, and it fails to tap into the other possibilities and opportunities that may also be present.
Yeah, that's so true. And, outside of cannabis, this is, an African problem a lot of the time where, we're just exporting raw materials. We're not adding any value. We're not processing as much. Yes, we can make money from exporting in volumes, but really how other developed nations generate more revenue for themselves is by adding value. That's why, the medical pharmaceutical cannabis is going to be such a huge industry, already is. But yeah, moving on, stay on that long. Hemp as well, something that I'm also very passionate about. I don't know if it's something that your role in the AU committee touches on as well. But is hemp in the conversation when you're going to these meetings at the
AU? So within the committee, our main focus so far had been more centered around medicinal use of cannabis. We did touch on some hemp-related issues and factors. However, at the time, the mandate was still quite limited in terms of, which aspect are we going to focus on and what the report or advice that is submitted should entail. And so I would say hemp, it did come up. However, it ended up being more focused on the medicinal side of the industry. So I think as time goes on, there is definitely going to be more of a discussion around hemp, just simply because I'm of the opinion that it is one of the lower hanging fruits in terms of tapping into the cannabis industry, and its risks are comparatively low compared to maybe other cannabis products which may have more psychoactive components, and that is where I guess the concerns around THC come in. So I do think that hemp will start to feature more in terms of the current conversations, but it hasn't really been center stage at this point.
Okay, can you dig a little bit deeper about what actually this committee is about? What do they do? I know you said that there's been conversations around the medicinal use of cannabis, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Okay, sure. Basically, the function of the committee and its purpose is to spearhead the drafting of the Common African Position and Understanding on Cannabis, which will inform national policies as guided by the African Union's Plan of Action on Drug Control and Crime Prevention. So that's its current mandate. However, I believe that we are still very much at the beginning, which is why perhaps we've only really been looking at the medicinal side. However, we've touched on hemp as well.
Again, for me, I'm slow, so you're gonna need to clarify this for me. But what does a common African position mean exactly? Is it about, okay, can we all agree on the legality of cannabis? Should it be legal or not? What does that common African position actually mean?
Correct. So it relates to having some sort of consensus on the continent relating to the legality of cannabis, also the definition as well, because again, if you look at a lot of the laws of African countries, there isn't really a distinction between the different parts of the plant. For example, just a simple one, in Lesotho as well, in our definition of cannabis, hemp falls into that as well. Therefore, hemp is regulated in the same cumbersome manner as you would cannabis that's being used for medicinal purposes. So then some of these discussions have been centered around how can that also be amended so that hemp is dealt with perhaps as an agricultural commodity. So it's really around definitions, it's around legality, and it's also been around information sharing and gaining insights and receiving comments and submissions from African member states regarding their approaches and what it is that they're implementing, so that we can also get a sense of the direction that the continent is going in, and also try to advise appropriately depending on what the goals and agendas of the individual member states are as well.
That's super interesting, and I hope that a lot of interesting stuff comes out of the committee. I know that there's people listening right now that actually would find this African Union part of the conversation quite interesting. You may be inspiring some young ladies as well to work with the AU. So I guess one of my questions would be, how is it working with the African Union, and well, what does the committee do? And by that I mean, how do you meet? Do you go to the Addis Ababa? Do you have Zoom meetings? How is it on a very, physical level? What do you actually do?
Okay. Well, I mean, to be honest, it has been a bit quiet on that front over the last year. So as a committee member, we would be called in and contacted as per a brief that we would receive. And then we normally had these meetings. So again, this committee's work, we started in 2020. And at the time, with COVID being what it was, our meetings were all virtual, and we would connect through virtual mediums and submit or share information through emails and combine our documents that way. So it's really been maybe ad hoc. So in that way, I'm pretty sure that its functioning has been perhaps different to other more permanent bodies within the African Union. And again, the people within the other committee members are also experts from various sectors, including the AU itself, UN agencies, and civil society, and so on. So you had a group of people that were also pulled from different bodies across the world. And it was a small group. I believe there were maybe like 11 or 12 of us. So we were still able to contribute and do work under this committee while carrying on under our different with our different work and projects. So for that reason, I think it might be a bit different to what somebody else's insights would be that works permanently within the structures of the African Union.
Yeah, but nevertheless, it is really, really interesting, and I was really excited to hear that they're getting more people, especially younger people, into this space, because a lot of the time it's older generations that might not see things from a certain perspective. So it's really encouraging to see that. So I guess I wanted to before we start wrapping things up, get to know from your experience what some of the main challenges in the cannabis space, and then what are some of the main opportunities that you found, both with your previous experience, consulting, etc., how people can tap into the space. So if you can maybe just cover some challenges and opportunities in Africa specifically.
Okay. I think in Africa, because it's such a new industry that has now gained legal acceptance, I think there are lots of opportunities relating to learning more about indigenous strains that are found in the different countries. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities on the genetic side and research and cultivation. I think there is also a lot of opportunities in terms of the provision of support services to the operators within the cannabis space, because you find that again, not everyone is going to have a license and not everyone is going to be able to operate from seed to sale. However, the industry is quite unique and it does need people that are specifically conversant with its dynamics and its demands. So I think they are opportunities both hands-on, but also within the ancillary services that cannabis operators would need, such as being a lawyer, such as myself, that specializes in such transactions, as well as financial advice to be able to assist cannabis operators to access capital, because as we touched on the banking challenges, that is one of the crucial issues that cannabis operations have, is, you know, how do they access capital if they're not able to apply for traditional loans and so on. And also other key issues relating to marketing of cannabis products, because in a lot of jurisdictions, you're not allowed to market them the way you would with other normal products. So there's definitely scope in the different, sectors relating to cannabis. And the challenges, again, I would say a lot of the challenges I think are still very much centered around the regulatory frameworks, because again, that's what lets you know what you can and can't do. And a lot of African countries are perhaps looking to develop or establish some sort of a cannabis industry, particularly now post-COVID, and looking at the opportunities that the cannabis industry presents in terms of uplifting and sparking a more economic drive and to create jobs, as the South African president has said on numerous occasions, that they are looking to the cannabis industry to boost the economy post-COVID and to create more jobs in South Africa. So, but the challenge again, it's the legal framework that still needs to give way and make it possible to achieve those.
That's well said, and that was really interesting when the South African president said that. Never would I thought in a long time that an African president would be so intentional about cannabis and using it to empower the country. So that was a really interesting development. So I guess just to wrap things up, there was a paper that was done by some. Can't remember what the organization was. They're from South Africa. You might be able to remind me, but they did like this very well thought out full document on how cannabis should be legalized across Africa. Do you know the one I'm talking about? I cannot remember the name. Okay, I'll probably remember it sooner or later.
Okay.
What green something?
Fields of Green?
Fields of Green, yes.
Yeah,
they wrote this thing. Can you talk a little bit about it? I don't know if you know the document I'm talking about.
I do. I think I do. They developed quite a high level manifesto relating to how cannabis can be legalized, and it was quite thoroughly researched, and it already made a lot of proposals for hemp and for medicinal cannabis, as well as for adult use as well. However, because I haven't looked at it recently, I'm a bit reluctant to delve too much into it. However, yes, I believe it's the Fields of Green Cannabis Manifesto.
That's fine. In that case, I'll just recommend, because myself it's been a while, but I remember, for those people that are listening, maybe you want to learn a little bit more about the industry, learn a bit more about different perspectives, and you want to go through a document that's been well researched, and they have a really interesting proposal on how things can be legalized across Africa. Just Google Fields of Green Cannabis Manifesto. I'm sure it'll come up somewhere, because when I was speaking to a lot of people in the industry, a lot of people were referring this document to me. So honestly, recommend this book. But with that being said, Tseli, this has been amazing. It's been a really smooth conversation. You've dropped a lot of interesting information. And yeah, hopefully, as things go on, hopefully we can have a part 2 of this, and you can share as things keep on developing, I intentionally didn't want this conversation to just be about, why aren't they legalizing, or why they shouldn't legalize. I didn't want to make it more of a moral conversation. I really wanted to understand, what's going on, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and you really did that. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. And do you have any final words before we wrap this up?
Thanks, Malobi. Thank you for inviting me on. I have maybe just a few words that I would like to add, and it really relates to encouraging more people to be active and to seek out more information relating to the cannabis industry, and also to participate. Again, I don't know to what extent in other African countries whether or not they do allow for submissions in terms of public participation requirements relating to enacting legislation. But I would really just encourage more people to participate and to make submissions when such opportunities arise, because I think, again, the worst thing that can happen is if we have policymakers making laws for us in a vacuum. Whereas I do believe that there are a lot of people that are passionate and are knowledgeable about the cannabis industry locally that can also offer very good perspectives. So it's really just encouraging more activism and research and engagement, and also just normalizing conversations about the plant. Again, I think that's the only way we're going to move from a position where there's a lot of taboo and stigma around it to it being recognized as a legitimate commodity and an avenue to assist African countries to develop their economies and to include cannabis in such developments.
No, well said. There isn't enough activism around the space for people that want it legalized. There's a lot of beer parlor talk and people just doing their thing, but there isn't enough. At least I can speak from Nigerian perspective. There are people doing things here and there in pockets, but it's not very well organized. And I think that if people do want this to be, legalized across Africa or within their individual countries, there needs to be more, civil society action, more activism, more, just general, just pushing the narrative, educating people on it, on the economic benefits. Taking it out of the illegal market, for the securities reasons, talk about the medicinal, so many different reasons. So if you are someone that's actually passionate about this crop, and you do want to see it legalized, you do have to go out there and do the work, because, the governments are not necessarily going to do the work for you, especially if it's a pretty conservative or a fundamentalist leaning government. So, yeah, well said. And I stand by 100% what you're saying. So with that being said, I'll wrap things up there. Thank you again, Tseli, for your time. This is the African Podcast, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Thank you.
And thank you, Malobi. Bye.
Bye.